What's up, APBio Penguins and recappers? So it is now time for our Unit 8 Q&A. So I'm just waiting for Melanie to make her entrance. So as a reminder, Unit 8 is all about hay. She was fast to get into the room. Unit 8 is all about ecology, which is, I'm going to go ahead and tell you, is my least favorite of all the units. And so you know how there's always a unit that you probably am not the most fan of. So ecology is definitely that one for me. Melanie, do you agree?
Hi.
Hi.
Yeah, ecology. Listen, we'll get through it together.
We will.
It's gonna be fine.
So before we get too deep, of course, we want to go ahead and introduce ourselves. So I am Tiffany Jones from, oh my God, I almost said the APsolute RecAP.
Not yet.
I'm Tiffany Jones from APBio Penguins, and you are?
I am Melanie Kingett from the APsolute RecAP.
I promise you, we're definitely as crazy as we seem.
The other day, you reposted one of my stories on your page, and it's so funny because people already kind of like see us interchangeable in some capacity. And then it got reposted a bunch of times from your account, and I was like, listen, it's all good. It's all good advice as long as the people get to know how to breathe through an FRQ.
Yeah,
it was just so funny.
Okay, I'm going to try to do your little snippy thing where I'm going to pin a comment, so it's always down there. Okay, now we're good. Okay, so remember, y'all, as you're coming in, be sure that you put your questions down, that little question box. I put something on my story earlier so that students could go ahead and put questions in, but a lot of students didn't submit many. So I want to make sure that you all know to put your questions down the box. There's only 3 questions here, but there was way more questions when I did on my story.
It might have expired.
No, it was from this morning. That's weird. Okay.
We did get one in the feed. So just a reminder to put them in the question box. We're doing ecology, which is Unit 8. I know there are still a lot of exam questions happening right now, so we'll address some of those towards the end that we can.
We will. We'll probably have like a little break in the middle where we'll go over some of those exam questions. So somebody says, can you go over the trophic levels? So what are the different levels of trophism?
Well, I like troph. I always think of pigs feeding from a trough.
Okay.
T-R-O-P-H. Well, it's the same root origin. You know I'm a nerd with words.
I know you are. You're good.
But
go with
trough meaning feeding. So we have like heterotrophs, autotrophs. So here we have trophic levels. So it all has to do with, energy and how is that energy being transferred from one level to the next. So go ahead.
No, go. You can do it.
Why are there only 4? Usually.
Well, there's 2 different theories, right? There's the first one, which is like the energetic hypothesis about that there's only 10% that makes it to the next level. So, of course, by being only 4, you get the most amount of energy, because if you keep going, you're going to get even less. So if we start out with like 1,000 kilojoules of energy, the next level has 100, and then 10, and then 1. So you have to consume so much more food in order to get the same amount of energy. And I believe the other one also has to do with like the longer chains, just not as
sustainable.
I think it's dynamic stability, possibly. I can't remember the real term. But I always try to think about like that. Anything, the longer your chain is, the more things can go wrong, right?
Absolutely.
So there's more places in which if there's a decrease in a population, that's going to cause the decrease of the population after it. And that's how I think these questions might show up on the exam. They're not just going to ask you just a point question of, how much percent has moved on. They're
identify the second trophic level.
Right.
No.
They're going to say that some organism is decreased, and because of that organism being decreased, you're welcome, is going to cause what will happen. And it actually came up on the FRQ Friday that I did this past Friday. There were 3 different organisms that ate this organism called a midge, which I don't even know what that is.
Just did that question too. I had to Google it. It was like a little insect.
Okay, so the midge, and so like they found that like 90% was eating, like 90% of certain organisms' diet was eating, and another was like 10 and like 30. And they said, well, which one of them is going to be most impacted by the decrease of the midge? And you would have had to make the connection. Oh, well, since 90% of its diet is midge, this thing was going to die. I think it was like the Candace, but I really don't remember the question that well.
It was integrated into like a food web, I think, right? You need to identify where the organisms went.
Yes, I did it on Friday for the FRQ Friday, which that was 2 days ago.
So long
my
ago.
brain is at this moment. So I hope we've answered that question about the trophic level.
Yeah, so in the concept of identifying the part while you're looking for your next question. So trophic levels on a diagram might be identified for you. Typically, it'll have the greatest amount of energy in the bottom trophic level. That's where your primary producers are, and then it just goes up from there.
So the different relationships we can have, and this is so much fun. Like, because a lot of these are logical because you learned about them in middle school, and then some of them are just things I've never heard of before. So let's go with the easy ones. The first thing, competition. So competition can either be intra-specific or inter-specific. What's the difference between intra and inter?
So it's going to be within or between different groups of species. So if we have interspecies competition versus intra is going to be within. So inter is going to be between you and another species group competing for something similar, like a food source. If you're competing for mates, well, that should be within your own species. I mean, competing for mates and without it's not in your own species, it's a waste of energy, although it happens.
It does.
Right? Misidentities.
I mean, that also goes into that competitive exclusion theory, where if two species are competing for the same source, one can actually exclude the other and kind of get that one completely gone. Are you glitching?
I have to ask you a question that's gonna.
No.
It's gonna be.
What are you on our lives? Like, you always put me on the spot.
No. This is gonna be a defining moment in our biological friendship.
Oh no!
Please pronounce Niche. Niche. Go ahead. Are you a nicher?
I'm a niche, not a nicher.
A niche or a niche? It's tomato, everyone. Whatever tomato's your tomato. It's funny. I say niche, and then sometimes I say niche. So like when I'm saying niche partitioning, I say niche. Niche. but it's all the same. Doesn't matter. But
the same thing with when you said telophase. I was end of our friendship. That's okay. So then we also can think about like commensalism, which I think biologically they don't think that commensalism really exists, because there's got to be something happening that maybe they don't see. But with commensalism, one's benefited and the other one has no effect. So it's kind of like these birds that stand on the backs of these, like, I can't remember what kind of big animal it is, but they're out in the fields, and as these organisms step on the ground, they cause the insects to move out. And so because the insects come out of the dirt, these birds can now swoop in and eat the insects, but the bird has no component to, I think it's like an oxen maybe? I can't remember.
I think an oxen relative, but when we think about these relationships, we're always talking about like positive, negative, positive, neutral. So like you'll see that expressed really often. Egret, cattle egret. Good job.
Thank you. Oh wait, it's Kaufman. Thank you, Kaufman. I love when she comes.
Yeah, the other one I had read about commensalism was really just like the person who follows, not the person, well, hopefully it's not a person, but like the jackal that follows, the lion and gets the scraps left over, right? The lion doesn't care. It's leftover carcasses. They're coming through. They're getting scraps. It's kind of this positive neutral moment. Right.
And somebody said it might be a rhino. So there's probably another situation where there's a rhino. So there's probably a lot of these examples. So parasitism is also going to be looking at that you've got one organism that's going to benefit while the other one is harmed. So there can actually be two different types of parasites. You can have an is it an exoparasite?
Exo, endo, and endo. Exo, right?
And endo. Yeah. So an exoparasite can be a parasite that's on the outside, so like a flea or a tick or a leech, versus an endoparasite would be like a tapeworm that's going to be actually on the inside of the organism.
And we have to remember that it's not just animals that have these relationships. It's plants, it's fungi. I mean, we often think of ourselves or something close to us when we have these examples, but it's not unique to us.
Right. And then predator-prey, one organism is benefited, that would be the predator, and one organism is harmed, that would be the prey, because the predator ate the prey.
Do we need an example, you think, or are we good?
I think we're good. Okay, well, I think we're good on that one. There's cooperation, which it's in the CED, but for some reason, every time I come up with it, I lose it. Like, it just does, it comes out of my brain. So do you remember what cooperation is?
Are you thinking of, like, the bee caste system and the concept of...
It was in a free response a while back.
Okay. I mean, I've seen that as an example of the cooperative behavior where you're looking for development of, the persistence of the population as a whole. I've seen it in like prairie dog explanations where you have...
That's altruism though, isn't it? See, the cooperation that I was thinking of, I think they both benefit because you've got two organisms that are both helping each other, but it's not exactly mutualism. It's not mutualism,
exactly
it's cooperation. Mutualism. Because I think the cooperation... it's weird. I don't remember. I'm sorry. I failed us again.
Well, the point of this is categorizing, and I think we're not saying this in a sequential pathway either. So like, if we could talk about like first like benefit, and then benefit harm. And we also have symbiosis weaved in here.
Symbiosis is a umbrella that's including 3 of them, mutualism, commensalism, and parasitism. And that's the problem with us. We're just coming off of our brain saying things, like saying the content, which is why there's no rhyme or reason the way we do what we're doing. We're just kind of talking.
And just to the point of application, you're likely going to have to extract the information from a prompt or a graph, and they're going to give you more information than just a term. A keystone species. Let's do it.
You got it, not me.
All right.
So what is a keystone species?
It makes the world go round. This is the kumbaya of it all, right? So a keystone species, number 1, will not be great in number. Okay, there won't be a lot of them in a population, but the role...
that's your dominant species. The dominant species is great in number. Continue.
Yeah. But the role that they have is really crucial. And it doesn't necessarily have to be their actions. Sometimes it can be like what they leave behind or the way that they interact with abiotic factors in their environment too. So, the wolf being an example, if you take the wolf out, whomever the wolf preys upon, which is diverse, they don't have typically one type of diet, they're going to see a population boom. And if there's a population boom on like a secondary consumer level, well, then you're going to have an extreme decrease on the primary consumer level. So the keystone species is like the missing piece of the ecosystem. If you take it out through perhaps hunting, perhaps human interactions, natural disasters, plagues, whatever, the ecosystem could collapse. I believe my students described it on their last FRQ as things are going to go out of whack. And I said, oh, no. We need a little better terminology. I know what you mean. However, out of whack is not predictive enough.
Okay, so a second ago, you mentioned the abiotic factors. So someone says, can we go over those abiotic factors? So first thing, let's use, like you love, the words, right?
I know.
Abiotic is going to be, something that's not living, right? Mm-hmm. So like temperature, water, soil, rocks, anything else.
Do you remember I messaged you the other day and I asked you if gravity was an abiotic factor?
Yeah. Did we ever figure that out?
I think so. I think it counts.
Because it's going to cause like certain organisms to grow certain ways. Like they go through the taxis in terms of, not really taxis, but trophism, in which they're going to be like, oh, I'm going to go, positive trophism away from
the name of those trees that the trunks bend, they touch the ground, and they come back up. They're so cool looking. Do you remember?
The thingmatrophism?
No, the trees.
Air is abiotic.
Different gases are abiotic, non-living. I'll have to Google it later. I can't remember. I can see it in my head. But
yeah, so anything actually, like if it touches, like that's stigmatropism. That's how like your tomatoes grow, is because they can feel and they grow because of the touch. Anyways, the abiotic factors would just be stuff that's non-living. So anything in the environment that you can think of that's not living would be abiotic.
So that's on your ecosystem level of organization, right? Because community is still only biotic. So when you get to ecosystems, you add abiotic factors.
And so like biotic would have been, predators, preys, all the relationships we just mentioned a moment ago, and looking at other organisms, how other living things affect them. And so you could have mutualism also in there. And we never gave an example of mutualism. You realize that?
Pollination, bees, flowers.
That's a good one. The bee of course, helps with pollination, and then the plant gives the nectar. So that's great. Awesome. I would like the termite one. Students never think about the termites. Yeah. About how the fact that they have the microorganism that digest the wood for them. And if they didn't have that, then they would be surviving. So kind of thinking about like a question, they mentioned there's this mutualism between two organisms. And then they mentioned that this certain thing happens to one of those organisms. What would happen to the overall process? And when there a question about that, like you had to graph like what would happen if they were obligate mutualism, and like if you got rid of one of them, then of course you would see a decrease in the other.
Probably. I know there's oftentimes the invasive species question comes in from that perspective with the graphs.
We have so more questions this time. It's making me so happy the number of questions we have. Yay.
Oh, I don't want to do this one. You got it.
So can you go over fundamental versus realized versus ecological niches, if you want to say that word, niches?
Yeah, I'm tapping out on this one. I did.
You're tapping. Why are you tapping out on this one? I wanted you to do this one. So fundamental is going to be. I did this because I wanted you to do it.
I'm sorry.
All right, so
let's define a niche first. Okay, so it's role that an organism has within its environment. Okay, it could be a physical place. It could be a location within a food chain or web. It could be how it preys upon its different organisms. I'm sorry, we're being very amorphous here. This is not our favorite unit. And it's okay. So I just want to go back to, you mentioned something about mutualism, and then I'm going to let you answer this question. But
I had to make sure I was right before I said
that's totally fine. I'll keep spitballing until you Google it.
You're good.
The thing about the mutualism, and you are not required to know any specific examples. Okay, for that reason, when you see a problem, and it's going to be like different bacterial populations competing within a petri, yada yada, just like take out the signs, take out the species names, put in X, put in Y, and read it again. Okay, because you don't have to know what those organisms are to answer the question. That's my advice. All right.
Okay.
Niches.
So, and I had to make sure I was right, because sometimes you get the terms backwards, and I'm assuming that's why the student asked the question.
I was explaining something the other day, and I was doing chi-square, and I got the number wrong.
Hey, it happens with best lists.
It does.
So fundamental niche is basically anything that would allow the organism to survive and be able to reproduce. So like everywhere where it could be. Okay. Mm-hmm. Versus the realized niche is where it actually is. And so earlier we were mentioning about the competitive exclusion principle, in which two organisms cannot have the exact same niche and be able to survive, right? Right. So if they have the same realized niche and they're both kind of in the same spot, then one of them is going to basically die out. We won't be able to have them anymore, right? Mm-hmm. But if they're able to adjust their realized niche and go out into the fundamental niche and kind of take another component of that environment, then they're going to be able to survive. There's a big example there's these lizards. And because of the fact that they could move to a different area, and now they could still perch on the branch and get their food, or perch on the fence and get their food, mm-hmm. they're going to be able to survive in that area. I think
so would this qualify as, is this qualifying as niche partitioning?
Yes.
So like, so when you have the same two groups of birds, or two species of birds that are both going to feed on the same berry, right? But one particular bird gets all the berries that falls on the ground, and the other bird is going to be up in the trees. They are not going to be directly competing, even though they're eating the same food source. You also can see this being alleviated by just like different times of day. And that would technically be different niches.
Right. And so as long as their realized niche doesn't completely overlap with each other, as long as one isn't able to switch out, then one of them will go away. Bye-bye.
Okay, we made it through that question.
Let's go to some stuff that's easier. Yeah, of course. They give me all kinds of crazy stuff that's not even this unit.
That's okay.
Animal behavior is ecology. Yeah, animal behavior.
Taxis and kinesis?
Yes. So going over taxis versus kinesis. So kinesis is random. Like there's no, like it's moving because it's moving.
Because the stimulus is there, it might be able to recognize it, but it's not towards or away. It's just like, oh no, there's a stimulus.
So the sow bugs, they prefer a moist, dark environment. And if you don't know what a sow bug is, it's a pill bug, aka a roly-poly. I think we have those in the South. I don't know. Do you have those up in the North?
We do. Yes, we do. We do have them. Okay. I'm in Pennsylvania, everyone. Just as a heads up. But we do have them. I did just do the same experiment, though. I mean, you'll see these a lot in labs done with like choice chambers, which is essentially just like a controlled environment where you can, have moisture, light, temperature controlled, and then get people to people. Pill bugs. I'm anthropomorphizing really bad tonight.
That's okay. Anyway, so because of the moistness, they're going to move slower when they're in a moist environment, and they're going to move faster when they're in a dry environment. Versus taxis, they're going to move towards or away from things. So like a fish is going to swim toward the current because of the fact that it wants to open its mouth and get the food. So because they're positive taxis. Versus like a cockroach is going to go through negative taxis, and it's going to move away from the light whenever you turn the light on in the room. They'll kind of move away from it. And so somebody asked the question in the chat, and I just happened to catch it. So they asked if there are going to be a lot of set questions on ecology, and any of the units can have set questions. There's no way to know. If you go based on previous exams, it looks like that a lot of questions are seeded in ecology, but they're not ecology questions. So they may be describing a whole bunch of stuff about the environment, but in actuality, they're asking you a specific, like a genetics question, or they're asking you a molecular bio or an adaptation or a natural selection. So they sound like there are a lot of ecological questions, but there's really, I think it's only, what, 12% of the exam? I can't remember the percents. I
for ecology
don't teach by the, I don't teach by the percents. Like, to me, I'm just going to teach the content. I teach biology. I don't care what they think is more important or less important because it's all biology. But remember, I see a lot of questions keep putting in the chat. Remember the question box is where to put your questions. And I'm specifically only right now looking at unit 8 questions.
Ecology,
so I'm going to go past your questions if you don't have a unit 8 question until we run out of unit 8 questions.
Ecology is 10 to 15%.
So my 12 was right.
Yeah, you're right in there.
Yeah, I'm right in there. I wish I would put these in order.
Taxis and kinesis are the responses. So of the organism.
That's evolution.
Earlier up.
Okay, we're gonna get Samantha's question. Okay, so Samantha says, can we go over K versus R selected species?
Mm-hmm. So I'm a K.
You're K. What do you mean by K? Go.
I'm a K selected. As are many top predators. So this is going to refer to your survivorship curve. And so as a K selected species, or my organisms, right, as everyone watching this, is going to produce less offspring. They are also going to survive longer. They're going to invest in the offspring that they have. And so when you see their survivorship, it tends to be very, very elongated before it tails off. Whereas R selected, they're going to be quantity over quality, right? They're going to make a lot of offspring. They're typically a prey species, mussels, mollusks. Those are all going to be R selected, as are most rodents, weeds.
With low parental care.
Yeah, I spent most of the time ripping some R selected species out of my front lawn earlier today.
That's lovely. Okay. But that also leads us into those survivorship curves, right? Because usually your K selected are going to have a type 1 survivorship in which they have that extended long on the top, where most of the individuals will live until old age and then they kind of drop off. Versus type 3 is like your R selected, where you're going to see a quick drop off because they die really quickly. But those that do survive can live a long time. So those kind of show you the type 1 is K and type 3 is R. And then there's a type 2 that's kind of like a linear scale in the middle. And there's a question that I know showed up earlier in my story, but I'm not seeing it in our list, and I want to make sure that I mention it because it's about the equations. And I specifically spent 5 minutes flipping all of my pictures around.
Let's do it.
I want to see if this will even work. So you're going to tell me if it's backwards, because remember, like last time we tried to do an equation, it was forward it was backwards because of the fact that I did it. So is that backwards to you, or is that forward?
It's backwards to me.
Then why did it not work last time?
Do you have your original one still, or no?
Of course I have the original. I just made images and popped them at the end because I'm smarter than that.
So we're going to go over the equations in Unit 8, your growth models, your Simpson's Diversity Index, birth rate, death rate. But remember, A, you can use a calculator. B, make sure you always use units. C, equation sheet is going to be, there it is. Equation sheet is going to be on your exam, whether you are digital or paper. Paper, it's going to be in the front. Don't tear it out. Use one of your pencils to stick it in there and keep your space so you can flip back and forth. And all of the equation sheet is going to tell you what a lot of these variables are as well, in case you forget. Little n, big N, they're different.
Gotcha. Okay. So FYI, if you notice in the top corner, it says marker learning, because this entire, like the 3 slides that I'm going to do are all about, actually 6, but the 3 are from the PowerPoint I just did yesterday with Marco Learning. So if you're having trouble with your formulas and you want to say, hey, can I see an example of every formula on the formula sheet? Then go to Marco Learning's YouTube channel. You will find my video from yesterday in which I went through every single equation on the formula sheet.
Amazing.
So in our exponential, we see dn over dt. That's showing you your change in your population over time. R max is your logistic rate of growth based on your per capita rate of growth, sorry. And then N is just your population size. And so like they're going to probably give you an R. If they don't give you the R, then you can solve that by saying, okay, well, the birth over the total population minus the deaths over the total population. So like if you were to fill that in, all you do is take your R times your N and you get easy peasy change is going to be 125. Logistic brings in our carrying capacity, so we still have the same beginning part. And I'm going through this a little quick just because I know that I did this yesterday, and so you're easily able to go find that other video if you want to. And then the logistic just brings in our carrying capacity, which is the most that the population can hold based on like the resources. And so I just added a carrying capacity of 650 here. So if we fill all that in, oh, my screen just did crazy stuff on the other side. You just add in your K. And so you're going to see that when we get to our logistic growth, where's my final answer? Because it wants to do crazy stuff over here. What is my computer doing? Okay, come on, machine, cooperate. Yeah, it's not cooperating anymore.
So logistic growth is going to experience rapid growth in the beginning, and then it's going to level out at the carrying capacity, so you won't have that continual exponential line.
Right. So you can see that because of the carrying capacity, we actually have a less amount of individuals like that are growing over time. And so you'll see that as you get closer to your carrying capacity, your rate of increase is going to decrease. And then
and it doesn't mean that organisms can't vary around their carrying capacity. It just means that if there is a boom there was an abundance of resources for, maybe the rain was really good that year. They might go above the carrying capacity briefly, but other restricting factors, we'll talk density independent and density dependent factors in a second, they'll bring the population back down.
And then the Simpsons Diversity Index is just looking at how diverse is the population. So somebody asked in the chat, what species richness? It's not on my slide, but species richness is just the number of different species that you have. Do not double check me because I made this problem up. But here's 3 different types of penguins. And so my species richness here, penguins. Of course it did.
Where's the chin strap?
I picked the 3 cutest names.
Okay.
That were all small. So there's actually a species richness of 3 because there's 3 different species of penguins here. And so when you solve this out, you would just sub in each of your number of individuals over the total. And then you would just do the math out and say, okay, well, I have 0.631. And that is all the equations that I have for you.
And the closer you have, the closer the diversity is to 1, the more diverse the population is. So, excuse me, the ecosystem is. So if you're comparing 2 different ecosystems, that would be a value you would want to stay pretty close to.
Somebody just has a question, so I'll go ahead and say it. What does the dn over dt mean when looking at the equations? That is just talking about the change in your n over your change in t, which would be the change in population size over the change in time. Anytime you see a d over d, it's always talking about the derivative, which is just the slope, which is just your time.
Your change,
okay. Yeah. Okay, altruism is this one, right? I think altruism is now. Do you round to the end? Problems will generally tell you a place to round to. I'm assuming a question asked about rounding.
Sig pigs. Yeah, it was asked about sig pigs.
Yeah, we don't ever play with sick pigs. I always like to say that because when I was in high school, my teacher did not pronunciate very well. And so for like a whole month, I was very confused and I was sad for the sick pigs in the world. But it took me a while and I finally found out that it was a sig pig, as in a significant figure. But so anyways, they're usually going to tell you if they do tell you, round 1 decimal place past that. So if they say the 10th place, keep everything in hundredths until you get to the end. Or since you're using your nifty TI calculator, then you can just store your answer and keep all of the decimals if you really wanted to make sure that you get the right answer.
Yeah, that's particularly important when you're doing chi-square. Don't round early. You will get the wrong answer.
Right. Okay, so how does altruism increase population's fitness? So first thing, what is altruistic behaviors?
Being nice to everybody.
Being nice, yeah.
Doing something that's not just for the good of yourself.
Right. Yeah. And so the way that it increases fitness, we talked about fitness before. Fitness has to do with the ability for an individual, or its ability to basically pass on your traits to the next generation. I can't talk tonight. And so it's how well you survive, how many offspring you have, and whether those offspring can also have offspring. So like a horky, aka a mule, is going to have a fitness of 0 because it's sterile. It can't contribute to the next generation. And so the way that it increases the population's fitness is, I always go back to the belting squirrels, right? So there's a belting squirrel that makes an alarm call. That alarm call tells the predator where it is. The predator comes and eats that squirrel. But because of that alarm call, the rest of the population was able to go hide. And so they weren't eaten by the predator. And so if they just all stayed out, then we probably would have had more depth. And so overall, the population has an increased fitness because they're more likely to survive and they're more likely to pass on their traits.
And when we're talking about population, that's the level we're talking about evolution, because individuals in and of themselves are not evolving, remember? So altruism actually is like a pretty great strategy for species perpetuation.
Okay. So we're going to take a slight break and let's talk about the test for a second. Just to help.
Friday. Oh my God.
Do you have to remind me of these things? Although I think it's funny that I keep reminding the students, so I don't really think that that's really nice of me because I keep reminding everyone. I get mad when you remind me. I keep losing my question. That's not the question I was trying to put. Sorry. I'm trying to find, whoa, I'm pressing my buttons. No, nobody come live with me. I'm behind.
We did have a question in the feed. I'll do.
I know, here it is. But I thought there was other questions about the exam. So they're saying that you're taking the online exam in June. Any tips? So overall, is there a difference between the paper exam versus the digital exam? Let's first start with that.
Sure is, but not in the big things. So by that, I mean, you are still going to have 3 hours. You're still going to have your 60 multiple choice, and you're still going to have your 6 FRQs. And I say that because that's not the same for all tests. So big picture, structurally still the same. How you take it will be different. No going back, only going forward. So you can't necessarily check your work, right? So once you commit to an answer, it will automatically save as you continue forward, and you have committed to that answer. So timing and pacing is really important, right? So someone mentioned the set questions a ways back. Set questions, 2-ish, maybe lean towards the 2-ish side per question because you have to do some reading. Whereas those non-set questions, you're going to be about 60 seconds. You're going to average out around 90 seconds. And that's the pacing for digital. If you're on paper, you're going to want to work a little faster than that so you can check your work. But if you can't check your work, use the maximum time on each of those questions. What would you recommend for digital FRQs?
Well, in the digital FRQ, I would also reorganize the one question. And so you can move throughout the single question. So you could do part D and then go back to part A if you know D, then A, then B, or however order you want to do it. The way I haven't seen the app, like in the app, although I have it, I have no tests.
Yeah, I don't either.
So what I've seen, but Kaufman has it. She keeps telling me every day. I don't know. I think because her students are taking the digital exam, mine are all taking paper.
Mine are
not. That's how they're registered.
Yeah,
but so supposedly when you go in there, you should be able to see part A is going to have a block, and then you can go to part B. It's a separate spot. And so I would do whatever you know first and then work backwards. Thank you for telling me again, Kaufman. So you would probably spend about 25 minutes for your longs. And so you have number 1 long and then number 2 long, 25 minutes for each. And then you spend 10 minutes for each of your shorts. And so the long for responses are going to be between 8 to 10 points. So you can kind of count your points and say, okay, every time you see a bolded term, it's probably going to be one of your points. So make sure you've answered every single bolded term you see. And this applies to either the paper exam or the digital exam.
Definitely.
Okay. And then in the short FRQs, there is a part A, B, C, and D. So it's 1 point for each part of the question. So if they say describe and justify in the same spot, that means that in order to get your point, you have to have both of those together on those short FRQs.
So you should be able to annotate, though, in both the digital FRQ section and in the multiple choice by like highlighting and marking up the questions. But unless you've practiced, that's going to be a really big hurdle for you. So definitely get that app, download the practice test, play around with the features, and get comfortable with them. If you're not comfortable with them, have a backup plan. Have a piece of scrap paper where you can jot some things down on. I mean, there's no cameras, there's no, they can't stop you from writing on a piece of paper to put your thoughts down. But it's only going to be an efficient strategy if you've practiced. Anything else, total distraction. So don't let the illusion of I'm home, I'm in my element, I'm comfortable, I'm at my desk, I have all my bio stuff. Don't touch it. It'll waste your time and you won't get the points.
And I would almost recommend finding a location that no one's going to bother you because you only have, the 3 hours for this exam. If mom comes in and wants you to clean your room, if, your little brother, little sister comes in, you need to find a place in your house in which no one is going to come in and bother you unless the house is on fire and you need to get out. Okay. So you need to find a way that you can kind of get that, like that zone. And also practice how you're going to take it, right?
Yeah.
So if you're going to take the digital exam and your teacher offers you the progress performance checks, or they offer you, you know, an online practice exam, don't go back. You know you're not going to be able to go back on the AP exam, so don't skip any questions. Keep yourself a little timer next to you, and you watch your time, and you make sure you move on when you're supposed to move on. The digital exam, I'm told, will have a little countdown clock on it.
Yeah.
So if you were taking the exam, you probably want to keep the countdown clock. I know it's distracting. I know it stresses you out. It stresses me out too. But by not seeing it, it's going to cause you not to be able to see your time, and time is going to get away from you. And I haven't worked with the app, but how fast is the refresh rate? Because on a paper exam, when you look up, you see you have 2 minutes left, you can bubble in, you know, 20 questions if need be, right? And you can guess. But on a digital exam, how fast are you going to be able to click your answer? Yes, confirm, next slide. Yes, confirm, answer, move on. I feel like it's going to take you a lot longer to Christmas tree it.
Yes.
Because of the fact that the refresh rate. So I would be very careful with your time on the digital exam. And
this one was in the feed, but does it mean that there are 2 long and 4 short? Yes, there are 2 long and 4 short. It's not a secret. They're in that order. And
they actually, it's not a secret what they are. Oh, sorry.
No.
You were going to say that.
No, that's what I was going to say. The skills they test are not a secret either.
And I don't remember which, I think I probably threw it away. No, I still have it. So I actually went through and analyzed the practice exams, and I know exactly which terms we're always going to see in those, or what questions we did see in those.
You
know, like it was always like the first question kind of varied a lot, but it always was a describe and explain an A. You know, B was always an identify and justify. You know, C varied a little bit. It was either identify, was a describe, a determine, a describe, or calculate. Like, so, you know, C and D varied a little bit, but it's basically exactly what they gave in the CED. So it's number one, you don't know what we're talking about CED.
Right. Course exam description. Go download it.
Right. So go to Google, AP Biology CED. You will find a link. Probably the first hit will be AP Central. Click on it, and it's going to show you the curriculum, what your teachers were supposed to use to teach you. So you know exactly what you're going to be tested on, and you know exactly what the science practices are. You know exactly the wording you're going to see in the on the free responses. You know, hey, there's some practice questions here. You can see exactly what kinds of questions, because things have been rewritten since the 2013 exam. You'll see a little bit of these differences. So
the other thing before we wander away from the digital exam, one big change is the graphing, right? So on the paper, one of the FRQs, I'm forgetting which one it is, number 5, I think. Yeah, number 5.
Sorry, I was reading questions to try to
that's fine.
Pull some more for us.
Is that you will have to interact with the graph in some way, but on the digital exam, because all of your responses have to be typable, there is a special character keyboard for things that you may need, but you're not going to be able to do graphing. So they've expressed that they will be testing the skill in a different way.
Okay, so I'm just pulling us back into the content. We took our little detour for a moment there.
Okay, so it's cut off. Can you read
I know
the whole
it is.
thing?
Oh. I know what the whole question says. Basically, the person says that Unit 8 is the last unit. My teacher didn't get to it. So I've watched those topic videos. I've followed, you know, the AP Bio Penguins, you know, story. I've listened to the APsolute RecAP. Is there anything else that we can use to study Unit 8 that's out there? What do you like? I know you like the APsolute RecAP, but what do you like?
I am biased, but hi, Samantha. I know Samantha pretty well.
So do I.
What would I recommend? You can get into the Discords. I think that could be a place to ask questions if you have questions to ask. But you have to know what to ask, I think, to find that space fruitful for you. Yeah. You could go into YouTube land.
Yeah, biology is amazing.
Bosun's amazing. I really think, honestly, at this point, though, it's about practice. So practice questions relevant to those units, you know, whether it's the quizzes, whether it's Barron's, you want to practice questions so that when you get a question wrong, that you've not studied this in Unit 7, you can use that as a guiding principle to dive into some material deeper. But in these last few weeks, and it depends on when they're taking the exam, the strategy has to be learning through practice. And so I would even just go straight to FRQs, and because multiple choice, you know, that's a skill, but FRQs are where it's at for real content application.
And in case you heard us talking about the app for the test, by the way,
oh yeah,
that's not going to be in the App Store. So if you're trying to find the link, number one, you can probably just type into Google, AP exam app, and you'll probably find it. But I also have it linked on my Weebly, so apbiopenguins.weebly.com. Under the 2020-2021 review, you click the drop down. The very first one says exam app.
Cannot use phone. Cannot use tablet. The term app is deceiving because you can't use either of those things. It is a computer application for your desktop, either Mac or PC, or a school-owned Chromebook. Personal Chromebooks won't work.
And Emily from Antisocial Studies did a demo at some point. I watched it, but I can't find it again to share it. But it locks out your computer. So you can't do anything on your computer when this thing is activated. I'm sure that in the actual lockdown browser, I've had students access all kinds of stuff. They access their files. They do all kinds of things in the lockdown browser. But this is taking over your computer. It's like the secure tester that we use in our county for the state testing. So it takes over your computer. You cannot do anything until the test is over. You can't get out of it in any way, shape, or form.
There was a question in the feed. I think we just want to back it up. So if you are 100% sure of part C of a question, but not sure of part A, what would you suggest you do on paper exam? Answer them out of order. You just have to label them. Do C first, and then go back and do A. And if you really have no idea on A, use something from the prompt to help guide you in your best educated guess, because you don't want to leave it blank if you can help it.
Yeah, A is usually from my working with these exam questions, as I've been kind of prepping my own students. A seems to be very content driven. Do you know your biology? And then B, C, and D usually is taking in some part of the graph, or taking in some of the prompt, and you're applying your biological knowledge there. So it's perfectly fine to skip A, right? As an AP reader, which you get to be a reader this year.
I know, I'm excited.
As a reader, we know to read out of order. We know our rubric so well that you can give it to me in any order you want, and I can read it even if it's labeled. If it's not labeled, I can read it, and I can score it appropriately and quickly. Okay, so let's see if there's any more questions in the chat. Okay, so Samantha's got another one for us. Is predator-prey similar to parasitism because we're seeing a benefit and a harm?
It's the same from a context of correlation, but parasitism is symbiosis, which means it's evolutionarily permanent.
Okay. And then I also like to think about that, it's harming it by taking away its nutrients versus the predator is harming the prey because the prey is now gone.
Yeah, parasites do not want to kill their hosts.
No,
that kind of is counterproductive. If you kill your host, then you can't get what you want from your host anymore. But it does sometimes happen as a consequence of, circumstance.
Okay. Now all my questions from the other thing dropped in. What is happening with this stupid thing?
Thank you for all the hearts, everyone. We're glad you're here to join us. We are in Unit 8 Ecology, if you've just popped on.
There is so many questions about not this unit. We talked about species richness already, right?
Yep.
Do we have to have the Simpsons diversity thing memorized for the exam? No, it's on your formula sheet.
Nope. Just be mindful of little n versus big N, because Simpsons has 2 n's. But it is also defined for you on your equation sheet as to what each one is.
And if there's an equation that you need that isn't a basic algebra type question, then they usually will give it to you. For a couple years before chi-square was on the formula sheet, they had to give you chi-square, the Simpsons or the shading. I can't remember which one it was on that exam. It was a couple of years ago. They gave it to them. So definitely fair game there. Okay. I don't have any more Unit 8. Unrelated. Okay. It's a graphing question. So how about we go with the graphing?
Let's see what we got.
So,
slightly unrelated to Unit 8.
The Y or the X. So whenever graphing, you should always give yourself an axis title for both axes. You should always label your axes as well as units. So I always tell my students to use the chart. So if the chart has at the very top, I don't know, grams per milliliter, and it's showing you, I don't know, some substance in a solution. You write out, concentration of substance in solution, and then parentheses, grams per milliliter, because you write out the entire title that's in the chart on the axis. And the same thing on your Y. Don't make it up. Don't try to shorten it. Just literally write the entire thing, and you probably will not go wrong. I haven't seen many cases where it goes wrong. And yes, chi-square is on the formula sheet.
Don't get stuck in X is always you know, manipulated, and why is like, just be cautious because the graph could be switched.
Exactly. So if you look at the fear responses in the CED, I think it's in the CED, because we did it last year when we did our lives. They flip the axis on you and they put your independent on what appeared to be well, it actually is on the vertical. So you assumed that it was the Y, but it was actually the X. So you need to be very careful about how you're reading your graphs also. Make sure you read them correctly. And you're only going to graph something if you're on the paper exam. Paper exam has the actual graphing component of it. Usually it's 3 points. You know, you usually have, you know, the point for the actual, can you plot the points correctly?
Right.
Usually there's a, can you make the error bars correctly? And then there's usually the, did you put the scaling and the axis labeling and the units? Usually is the breakdown for it. You know, sometimes moves a couple of those things around depending on what kind of graph it is. Be very careful if they tell you the kind of graph. There was a graph a couple of years ago where they asked for a bar graph, and the number of students who gave me a line graph. So if they tell you the type of graph, be sure to give them that type of graph.
And also watch your times, right? Yes. So especially in circumstances where the time interval is not equal, right? If time was doubled every time a sample was happened, your scale needs to represent that on your axes.
Okay, so why would the highest concentration of toxic pollutants be accumulated in the top predators of like a trophic chain? So why do we see bioaccumulation?
Because that's what eats everything beneath it. Right. Has nowhere to go.
Well, and you're also going to consume more of them, right? So if there's a small concentration in, say, this algae, right, then the next organism, your primary consumer, is going to eat that algae, and so it's going to have 5 times as much. And then as we eat more and more of those lower organisms that already have that accumulation, it continues to build up so that those top predators get the most amount of mercury or whatever these other toxic chemicals
proportionally to the whole, right? So you also have less organisms as you go higher up too.
Yes. Sorry. There's a question in the chat, and it goes back to what we were just mentioning about the graph. So the digital exam, from what I've heard, and tell me if you've heard anything different, they're going to ask a question that is about a graph, but they're not actually going to have you graph something. I think it'll ask you, specific thing about a graph, but they still are going to test the same standards that they would of, can you make a graph?
Yeah, in some capacity, they're going to have to get you to articulate how a graph would be done. It reminds me a little bit of the experimental design FRQ in physics, where you have to describe how something would happen. I can see them kind of doing something in that vein where you have to be more descriptive, but we'll see.
Samantha is just typing something.
Samantha, all the questions.
All of them.
Sure.
So will they ask you to graph any other types of graph other than a line? Well, yeah. Check the CED. If you look in the science practice, it'll tell you all of them. I think it's like box and whisker, scatter plot, bar graph, histogram. They've got all the graphs in the world. They're all on there. So make sure you know all your graphs. Where was I going with this?
I don't know. Yeah, they can ask. So I mean, just in correlation, there are certain graphs they expect you to know. It is one of the skills. So that would be for you to produce and for you to interpret. So it goes both ways. And then, they can technically ask you anything if they give you enough information.
And there's a graph that they don't have on there that a lot of students tend to draw. It's called a modified bar graph. So basically it looks like a line graph, but you don't put the line on it, but you put the error bars. And so literally it's just a data point, and then you have the error bars coming out of it. And that's called a modified bar graph. And I have seen that accepted before for like a bar, like they tell you to make a bar graph, and you do a modified bar. I've seen that. So this question has now been in the chat and is also in the question box. So let's let this teacher also have her answer. I don't know if it's a her, I'm sorry. Their answer. So they said that they only have 3 days. So what should I do to help my students focus for these last couple days?
Teacher here.
So there's a remaining 3 days on FRQs. So what do I need to do these last 3 days as a teacher to prepare my students? Because I only have 3 more days with them because the exam is in 2 Fridays.
I would say anything that builds appropriate confidence, right? I would also, I know personally, one of my last days is going to be next week, and we're going to do misconceptions. all we're going to do the entire class, identifying misconceptions and why they're misconceptions and what's wrong with the statement. And so it allows the student to kind of get their grit, which is really what they need at the end. They need a little bit of grit going into the exam.
And I don't know
on content.
No, I don't know what your setup is for your classroom, but for me, I think that if you can have like either a digital or a face-to-face practice exam for them on like a Saturday or after school on a Friday or whatever day, and allowing them to, the next time you have class with them, put them in groups so that they can work with someone who got a similar score to them, but they missed different questions. And so don't tell them who got which ones right, but tell them which questions they got wrong. And so between the two of them, they can discuss and they can work kind of back and forth, and they can explain their information, and they come up with their misconception. They can kind of help grow as a group. Plus, it also helps your weaker students because of the fact that, well, I know this one and you don't. So it helps to build that confidence because they knew something that someone else didn't, which I think is very helpful for students at this point to know that you've got this. I had a
student who, similarly who told me that they always feel like they did really well, and then they find out they didn't. So there's this gap, there's this disconnect between what they think about their success and what their success actually is. And so it's trying to get those 2 points to come closer together, so that they can dive into why they're getting those points wrong. Because you telling them isn't going to be fruitful, as fruitful at this stage of the game.
Okay, so let's talk about controls, just in general experiment. What is a control? Like, what's a negative control?
My students keep messing this up, controls and constants, and it's been frustrating. Asked to identify a control, and they identify a constant in an experiment because they both begin with C's. Do you have that happening anymore?
Not really.
No.
If they got it, they got it. If they don't, they don't. And they usually know they don't have it. But so a lot of students have the difference between the positive and the negative control. And I always have to look it up. So like the negative control is testing your experiment. Like, does the antibiotic kill the bacteria? Like, and so if I gave it the plasmid, we'll be able to survive. So that would be your negative control, seeing does antibiotic kill the bacteria. Your positive control is giving you a response to ensure that the experiment is favorable. Valid, yes.
Valid, yeah.
So if you grew your bacteria with plasmid on a plate that had no antibiotic and it died, then you have no way to say that, oh, well, the one with the antibiotic also died, so it must have been the antibiotic. Well, the one without antibiotic also died, which means there must have been something wrong with your experiment. So that's like the positive control is something you expect versus your negative control is testing your experiment. And then Kaufman added in negative control, what should no result look like? Positive, what should a valid result look like? So great job adding for me, Kaufman.
So when you're comparing your variable groups back to something else. So I said the word constant, so I might as well follow up on that. So constants are going to be things that are kept the same for all of your experimental, all of your independent variable groups. So if you're testing the effect of temperature, then your humidity should be the same, your salinity should be the same. All of those other factors need to be constant. So those are not controls, even though you control them right. You're controlling them. You want them to be the same, but they are not a control group. And so that's where my students have been faltering lately.
And be very careful on your responses when you're describing why you use control. Don't just say, oh, well, it's a point of comparison. What do you mean? Directly connect it to your experiment. I'm ensuring that the antibiotic has an effect or does not have an effect on the bacterial growth. So connect it directly to your question or your prompt, because otherwise you're just giving them a vague answer. So the question now is in the chat, or I'm sorry, in the question box is, can you explain null hypothesis? So what is a null hypothesis?
No effect, right? So no effect instead of alternative hypothesis has an effect. And so then we will reject or fail to reject our null hypothesis.
So with the null hypothesis, you always want to say that the control and the experimental will be the same. And this is where your error bars comes into play. So they may ask you to graph something, you come up with a null hypothesis, and then like you have to say, okay, well, would you accept or reject? And so oftentimes if those error bars overlap, and so when I say overlap, I mean like the bar went up, the other bar went down or whatever. And if there's any component of them that overlaps and or have the same Y value, okay, that shows you're not statistically significant, right? And so that's showing you that it wasn't due to chance that this one's higher. I know this looks like it has a higher mean. It does have a higher mean, but because the variability of the data, you can't actually say that this experimental group actually had an effect on it.
And this is where you get into APBio land, right? Because if you're just comparing averages, then the averages are different and you're saying that there is a difference. But those overlapping error bars do not allow you to say statistically different. Yeah.
So for standard error of the mean, what does plus or minus 2 mean when it's in the FRQ? That's just telling you the error, right? So if it says plus 2, you go up 2 from your mean, minus 2, go down 2 from your mean. So it actually will tell you how to graph your error bars, and make sure you do have those on there.
If your error bars have a really big spread, that's representing your data variance. If your error bars are really tight to your average, then you have less variance in your data.
We got another ecology question. Sorry, we finally got another one. So what is the difference between the graphs of a logistic growth and exponential growth? So how do those graphs look different?
So exponential is just your J shape, right? So there's nothing limiting the growth of that population. You know, it's the utopian. There's no predators or being a problem. There's lots of food, lots of mating, J-shaped curve. Okay, so exponential growth. Whereas your logistic growth model, there's going to be reaching carrying capacity. So you might start off as exponential, but then you're going to plateau at the population level that the ecosystem can support.
Which is an S-shaped curve.
S-shaped curve.
Yes. I just realized what time it was.
Yeah, we were just about done.
Yeah, I've been so into the session that I just completely didn't realize what time it was.
Can we just have a little mini clap that we survived Ecology Live?
We did.
Great job.
So for everyone that's there, okay, you have what, 10 days left? Is it 10?
10 sounds about right.
10 sounds about right. Okay.
It's on the 14th.
For the first administration, the second administration is on the 27th of May. Third one is June 11th. Okay. You got this. You prepared. So I do want to remind you that all you can do is your best, right? So do your best. No one will ever be upset with you. You can't be upset with yourself. No one's going to say anything to you because your best is always enough. You can't do better than your best. You did your best. And remember, it is just a test, right? So I know that there's a lot of stress, like, oh my God, COVID and pandemic, a lot of stress on a normal year, right? Oh, I got to get college credit. You know what? I got college credit for calculus. I still took calculus in college because I wanted the recapture of it. I wanted a refresher of it. I was afraid I didn't remember stuff, but I did, right? And so even if you don't pass the APBio exam, it's not the end of the world, right? You could take the class in college and it will be an easier course because you will have your foundation. You will have remembered something. You've got notes. You've got something. Skills.
Yes.
So don't sit there and go, oh my God, I have to pass this thing. Just do your best. Don't worry about your score. Don't get inside your head. Oh, I didn't know that question. Okay, I'm going to do my best on that one and I'm going to move on. Okay, especially when you're on a digital exam. Okay, do not get in your head. Don't freak out because you don't know one thing. You know what? You don't have to make 100 on the exam in order to pass. Okay, I think based on like some of the past data we've seen, if you can get 50% of the points of the entire thing, you can make a passing score. Okay, so deep breaths. You've got this.
For sure.
You are penguins and recappers, and we support you and we believe in you. And Melanie, you got anything you want to say?
No, I'm just excited that we're here. Be proud of yourself. You've done all the hard work already. Now it's just enjoy the experience, whatever it happens to be. Find some joy in the day, and that will help you to come out positive on the other side, right? Be proud of what you've done so far. You are phenomenal. The fact that you're even here putting in time that you are not required to do to get some more extra information just shows your dedication to your own self-growth. And that's what's going to be useful to you 10 years from now, not the score you got in your APBio exam. Sorry.
No. Like when you think, if you were to talk to anyone out there and say, okay, what do you remember from high school? They're going to tell you about things that happened. They're not going to tell you that, oh, I made a 5 on this AP exam or I made a 3. Like, I'm sorry. It's a test. It's a score. There's so much more to your life and there's so much more to school. So anyway, sorry. We got off of our tangent. So,
I know. Well, we'll see you guys in 1 week.
Yes, we will see you next week. Same time, same place. We'll do a full-on Q&A.
Any question you want within reason.
For the most part. I still am going to play my which ones do I want to click.
Yeah, I know.
But you are all AP Bio Penguins because you're in this live and you are dressed for success. Good night,
Have
everyone.
a great night, everybody. Bye.
Bye.